Congress's Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic is out with its final report. The 557-page document titled After Action Review of the COVID-19 Pandemic, the Lessons Learned and a Path Forward has determined that a lab-related incident involving dangerous gain-of-function research in China is the most likely origin of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Let's start from the beginning.
A dangerous virus is spreading rapidly in China, and U.S. officials are very worried that it could come here. China has more than 200 confirmed cases of coronavirus, it's called, which produces pneumonia-like symptoms. 3 people have already died from this illness, which has spread to at least 3 other Asian countries.
3 people tied to universities and a hospital in the Boston area were indicted on charges that they lied about their ties to China. Prosecutors say that these separate cases point to the ongoing threat of Chinese espionage here in the U.S. Prosecutors say that the individuals attempted to steal research in order to bring it back to China.
Good morning. We're here today to announce 3 separate cases highlighting the ongoing threat posed by Chinese economic espionage and research theft in the United States. First, the arrest today of a Harvard University professor for lying about his participation in a Chinese foreign recruitment program. Second, this morning we have unsealed a separate indictment of a Chinese national working as a scientific researcher at Boston University who failed to mention on her visa application that she is also a lieutenant with the People's Liberation Army. Finally, this office has indicted another Chinese national for trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the United States to China and lying about it to federal investigators. That defendant, whose entry to the United States had been sponsored by Harvard University, was a cancer researcher at a lab at the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center.
We need to know the origin of this virus.
They could have stopped it, but they allowed it to come out. China virus, Kung flu.
With some, like David Asher, who ran the State Department's investigation into the origins of the COVID virus, accusing China of negligence for not alerting the world sooner.
We're talking lights out. There was no cooperation, and there still is no cooperation.
Look at this virus with your expertise. You see the workings of evolution and of nature. You don't see the hand of some diabolical scientist cooking up coronavirus.
Absolutely. That just didn't happen at all.
Robert Gary of Tulane University is one of the world's leading virologists.
Look at the data a little closely. And I think that most scientists, and certainly most virologists that have already done this, will come to the conclusion that we're looking at a virus that came from nature.
Gary argues the genetic code of the virus looks like the kind of thing that happens randomly in nature, not in a lab.
It's really nothing that any experienced virologist or, even your worst graduate student would do.
And that remains the consensus among most virologists, that this coronavirus has none of the telltale fingerprints of overt bioengineering. But a stubborn, puzzling fact emerged. Of the first several dozen cases of COVID in Wuhan, almost half of them cannot be traced back to that wet market.
Ever since the COVID-19 pandemic began more than 3 years ago, there's been a continuing debate about what was the origin of the virus. Did it occur naturally in nature, or was something more sinister afoot? And now the Sunday Times of London, one of the most prestigious newspapers in the world, says after a massive investigation, the evidence suggests that the pandemic was the result of a lab leak at China's Wuhan Institute of Virology, where a secret military program was attempting to create a global bioweapon. The argument being here that the Chinese military wanted to create a virus, develop a super virus, develop a vaccine for it to protect its own people, and then unleash it on the world. And we all know that what did happen was devastating. 7 million people have died. Global economy still hasn't fully recovered. Now, the interesting thing is that this theory at the beginning of the pandemic was dismissed by many as a conspiracy theory, anti-China. But the Sunday Telegraph says after enormous research by a team of its investigators, looking at previously top secret and secret government documents, emails, studies, interviews with some of the top U.S. Virus investigators, that they've all come to the conclusion that this is the most likely thing that happened. One of the experts said that he thinks the worst virus they developed didn't get out, that there was a worse one that they have compared to COVID-19. And that fortunately it didn't get out. But that raises the question of, do they still have it? And apparently what happened was this all starts in 2003. It's all going fine. 2016, they apparently find a new coronavirus in a mine in a province of China. And that's when the public information goes dark. And that's when all these experts interviewed by the Sunday Times said, if it's true, this horrendous and evil plan came into effect.
One of the biggest cover-ups by scientists and government officials of our time. An astonishing deception that warrants apologies and retractions. Tonight, the damning evidence that proves that the very scientists and leading government officials who told us COVID-19 came from a wet market actually suspected it was genetically engineered in a Wuhan lab. A cache of emails and Slack messages has been subpoenaed by a United States congressional committee. The US Select Subcommittee on the Origins of COVID-19 subpoenaed emails and Slack messages from the scientists who wrote a paper published in the prestigious journal Nature Medicine that said the virus had a natural origin. They insisted a laboratory leak was a conspiracy. The private correspondence shows how the group of international scientists, including from Australia, colluded to insist COVID-19 had a natural origin. Spurred on by Anthony Fauci, they would insist any likelihood of human error for this outbreak was a conspiracy theory.
It seems that Anthony Fauci may have also played a role in censoring the scientists' suspicions, right? The suspicions that it could have originated from a lab leak. So going back to Christian Andersen, he wrote the following in an email on February 4th, 2020. The idea of engineering a bioweapon is definitely not going away, and I'm still getting pinged by journalists. I have noticed some of them starting to ask more broadly about lab escape, and for now, I have just ignored them. There might be a time where we need to tackle that more directly head on, but I'll let the likes of Jeremy Farrar and Tony Fauci figure out how to do that. Okay, now another huge reason that scientists could have misrepresented their beliefs was to appease the publisher of this report. So it was eventually published in Nature Medicine, and apparently Nature Medicine initially rejected the paper in part because they feared that if it even suggested a possible lab leak was possible, conspiracy theorists would run rampant with that information or with that possibility. And here's how Andersen responded to Nature Medicine when these concerns came up. Andersen pushed back against the rejection, assuring the Nature editor that their project had started with the goal of beating back conspiracy theories, but that the data and evidence made it impossible. None of this helps refute a lab origin, and the possibility must be considered as a serious scientific theory, which is what we do, and not dismissed out of hand as another conspiracy theory. We all really, really wish that we could do that. That's how this got started, but unfortunately, it's not possible given the data. Again, that is a statement from Christian Andersen on February 20th of 2020. Ultimately, the authors conceded and they changed their work rather than stand by their suspicions. The authors edited their paper further to more strongly dismiss the possibility of a lab leak for its later submission to Nature Medicine. The journal's publication of the paper just a month later effectively ended debate for a year or more as to the origin of the pandemic.
So I'm gonna read you one more devastating quote that shows you exactly where the problem came from. And then we'll talk about how you can tell whether scientists are telling the truth or not these days. And I hate that we're forced into that conversation because of the mistakes that these knuckleheads made. And knuckleheads is putting it politely. Anyway, here's another email that was discovered by the scientists. At the end, one of them writes, another says, anyway, it's done. Sorry the last bit had to be done without you. Pressure from on high. Okay, that's definitive. So that's government sources like Fauci and the others going, no, let's not say what's true. Let's put pressure on the scientists to skew the results in a certain way so people think that it is not from the lab.
This morning, the CIA confirms it's looking into accusations that several members of an agency team tasked with COVID pandemic analysis were paid significant hush money to shift their position regarding the origins of the virus. 2 Republican lawmakers have sent a letter to CIA Director William Burns claiming that a senior-level current agency officer came forward alleging the payoff. They say, according to the whistleblower, 7 officers were assigned to the CIA's COVID discovery team, and 6 of the 7 members of the team believed the intelligence and science were sufficient to make a low-confidence assessment that COVID-19 originated from a laboratory in Wuhan, China. The letter claims only one person on that team, who was most senior, believed that COVID could have been transmitted from animals to humans, but that to come to the eventual public determination of uncertainty, the other 6 members were given a significant monetary incentive to change their position. The whistleblower did not explain the payments or who might have made them. The CIA tells ABC News, we are committed to the highest standards of analytic rigor, integrity, and objectivity. We do not pay analysts to reach specific conclusions. The origins of COVID have been the subject of several congressional hearings. Former CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield earlier this year testified he was excluded from discussions because he believed the lab leak theory warranted investigation.
It was told to me that they wanted a single narrative and that I obviously had a different point of view.
Dr. Anthony Fauci called that accusation untrue. In June, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence said the CIA and another agency were unable to decide on where they think COVID's origins lie, as both hypotheses rely on significant assumptions or face challenges with conflicting reporting. This new letter is asking for documents related to the COVID discovery team's creation, communications about COVID's origins, and records of any financial bonuses.
Per the subcommittee, the 5 strongest arguments in favor of the lab leak theory include: 1, the virus possesses a biological characteristic that is not likely to be found in nature. 2, data shows that all COVID-19 cases stemming from a single introduction into humans. This runs contrary to previous pandemics where there were, in fact, multiple spillover events. 3rd, Wuhan is home to China's foremost SARS research lab, which has a history of conducting gain-of-function research at inadequate biosafety levels. 4, Wuhan Institute of Virology researchers were sick with a COVID-like virus in the fall of 2019, months before COVID-19 was discovered at the wet market. And 5, by nearly all measures of science, if there was evidence of a natural origin, it would have already surfaced.
The findings state that EcoHealth Alliance nonprofit used American taxpayer dollars to facilitate gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, and the proximal origin publication, which was used to discredit the lab leak theory, was prompted by Dr. Anthony Fauci to push the preferred narrative that COVID-19 originated in nature. The report also states that more than 160,000 businesses closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, with 60% of those closures classified as permanent. Unemployment rates surged to levels not seen since the Great Depression, and children experienced historic learning loss, higher rates of psychological distress, and decreased physical well-being due to school closures.
Reactions on X are pouring in, and some people are less than pleased, saying the report does not go far enough. Media pundit Jeff Carlson posted, "This report reads like a whitewash of Fauci, NIH, and the rest of our government, pinning most of the blame onto EcoHealth. Federal government was deeply involved in funding gain-of-function. Daszak's EcoHealth was simply the mechanism. We need a true accounting." Other users wrote, "When do the prosecutions start? The 4 years of trauma, 4 nasty cases of COVID-19 and damages accumulated by it. Nowhere is it expressly stated who will be held accountable for anything. None of this will matter unless actual humans are held accountable, with financial loss and imprisonment. Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic should be ashamed. Final report, this should just be the beginning. And I do appreciate the conclusions the report draws in terms of strengthening, bolstering the idea that this did in fact come from the lab, and pointing out to the numerous failures, the irresponsible behavior of EcoHealth Alliance. I agree that our own governments, our own agency, NIH, Fauci himself, have not properly been held accountable for greenlighting this funding.
The defense rests.
You've disconnected from the hive mind. Explain.